Well. Welcome back. We are here together again. I'm Zen Cop, aka Mac Rollins, with some new equipment. Hopefully, it sounds good. Bear with me as I try to figure this out. I've been messing with this equipment for the better part of the day and just sort of said, all right, we're going to give it a shot. Hopefully, the audio sounds good. Hopefully, it's better than before and a little bit more, I don't know, high quality. We'll see. So, last week I did talk about doing something kind of special and fun in terms of content. I was going to kind of tell a story. That got put on hold because of the incident that occurred in Riverside County. For those of you who don't know, Riverside County, which is in Southern California, they've lost two deputies in almost the last 3 weeks. I might have my dates mixed up, but I want to say two, but I would say for certain almost a little over 2 weeks, maybe three. They've lost two cops. Why I chose to talk about that, not necessarily the incident, but just overall, right? The climate of law enforcement as a whole right now. And I wanted to talk about control and how we don't have it right now, and how many times throughout the days or weeks we can confuse control versus adjustments. And if we had control of something, we'd be able to make adjustments. If we don't have control, then we can't adjust anything yet because we don't have the power of control yet. And I use that word a lot. I've talked about control in every aspect of this job. And if you don't have control of certain things, they're going to spiral out of control. And over the past 3 years, the climate of law enforcement has felt more like a Category 5 hurricane than anything else. And for the first time in many years, this controversial climate did not only impact law enforcement, but society overall. And when an incident creates national crisis, everyone's affected by the aftermath. And in 2020, almost every part of the United States felt that ripple effect, and the world. And unless you're living on Pluto, it was hard to escape it. And we often use the word, the pendulum. The pendulum is swinging. And in the past, 900 days or so, I have never in my entire life felt like the pendulum is swinging. I couldn't disagree more. It is not swinging. It's a wrecking ball that has lost control. A pendulum would imply some type of accuracy and precision and a true return to its equilibrium when gravity ultimately wins the war of physics. And for the first time in a very long time, accuracy and precision are nowhere to be found. And I guess the people on the other side of the fence would argue that chaos in the realm of social justice would be a good thing, but I think we can all agree that change is healthy, and reform, after all, is what they were fighting for. But in the bigger picture, however, is change and reform always the best post-incident option in the realm of proactive policing within the United States? And for us to understand the policing pendulum, we have to first understand why the pendulum swings or moves or gets disrupted. And any movement for that pendulum is more times than not brought on by a catastrophic incident. And that incident can vary in nature or action, but I would say ultimately it's safe for us to assume that something bad happened. A controversial shooting, an in-custody death, major policy changes, a terror attack. I mean, the list is infinite, but it's exclusive to negative action or a negative incident. And to this day, I have yet to see any sort of aggressive reformation efforts based on something positive. I just haven't seen it. And when we are presented with any type of social justice reform, it's important for all of us to look to the past and ask ourselves one very important question. And that question is, has this happened before? And if the answer is yes, what was the long-term outcome? And in my findings, many of the the critical incidents that have caused national movements are almost repeated in identical fashion every time. And that fashion is incident, reaction, sustained reaction, resolve, and then zero follow through. And the lack of follow through is very important. And we'll come back to that later. But for the current law enforcement generation, George Floyd's death will probably be the most pivotal point of their careers in terms of overall aftermath and reforming of policy within the United States. We've already seen drastic measures and drastic reform that has not only compromised the safety of officers and the public, but also for those who are in violation of the law and are detained as a result of a violation of the law. And it creates a really slippery slope. And the incident itself involving George Floyd, that gained national notoriety within hours, and I would say international notoriety within the first day or two. And the world was focused on only one man, and one man that before that day, no one knew who he was. And that man was ultimately identified as a Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin. And that man, in a matter of minutes, would change the course of history forever. And in the months following the incident, we as a country would see a year of sustained protests and riots. And within that same year, law enforcement agencies would also lose any type of positive connection they once had with the public. And the concept of law enforcement being a positive entity among any community was quickly fading nationwide. And the average person in the United States who may have once been sort of neutral in their opinion on law enforcement would now side with the likely possibility that most cops were in fact corrupt, racist, cruel, or just otherwise completely untrustworthy. And the pendulum at that time was moving quite quickly and in all directions. And while the mission of the social justice movement was to prevent an incident like George Floyd from ever happening again, their mission came with a very high cost, and that cost is not something that we can count in terms of currency. We can tally the cost of damages and the loss of human life for the year 2020, but the numbers we can't put on a spreadsheet are the costs of rebuilding the relationship between the community and those sworn to protect it. And that relationship is, in my opinion, priceless and often completely overlooked when emotions are running high. Everyone's concentrating on the immediate, and rather than the future, they will be focused on the present. And that can be very detrimental in terms of long-term ripple effects for society. But in the realm of law enforcement, we face the same issues as any other business or entity in terms of employee and employee behavior. And, no employee is ever going to be perfect. We all make mistakes, and mistakes will be made, and hopefully they are corrected and recourse is provided. Do evil people exist? Yeah, sinister and evil employees do exist, and they are, however, extremely rare. If we look at everything, there's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, teachers, firefighters, contractors. Plumbers again. The list goes on, right? But I guess the simple way to look at it is there's bad apples within any profession. I think we can all agree on that. Within the arena of public safety, however, those bad apples seem to gain the most notoriety when and if they are discovered. And I guess the important thing to understand is where do the bad apples come from? And more importantly, with the current climate of law enforcement, will there be more bad apples on the streets than ever before? And some would say, well, how is that even possible? And I, for one, can assure you that it's more of a possibility right now than it ever was before. In the year 2019, there were hundreds of thousands of applicants all over the nation getting ready to begin their career in law enforcement. And some would-be first-generation cops, some were following in their parents' footsteps, some were from challenging backgrounds, some were first-generation Americans, all walks of life, all sexes, all races, everyone ready to do their part to make this world a safer place. And at the time, all of them good apples. In the realm of fruit, though, it's important for us to understand that bad apples, they are not bad from day one. There is something that happens to them along the way that makes them rotten. And the reasoning behind their spoiled core, if you will, that can vary in cause and nature. But once they're mixed in with the bunch, it's very difficult to tell them apart. And sometimes you just have to take a bite, and the course of history will change forever. And Derek Chauvin was a bad apple. And what happened on May 25th, 2020 was a big bite. And as this new generation of would-be great cops watched all of that unfold on live television, most of them decided to pursue other career interests, other career fields, and background investigators were getting phone calls left and right from applicants explaining that they were basically no longer interested in the position. And what was so funny and strange was they were about to get offered their dream job. So what happened? And this became so common among agencies that background investigators started asking the applicants, almost like an exit interview, and they weren't even employees yet, some follow-up questions. And, was it another agency? Did you find someone else that paid better? Was it too long of a commute? The answer was almost linear across the board. And they basically said, I decided that I didn't want to be a cop anymore or want to become a cop anymore. They didn't need to ask any more questions. The writing was on the wall, along with every news network across America. And all the future great cops were going to instead become great whatever, members of society doing something else to make a difference, anything but being a cop. And for a time when the very best was needed for the future of law enforcement, there was not a lot to choose from. And going back to the fruit concept, when there's slim pickings on the orchards, spoiled fruit will more than likely make its way to the market. And as we approach the 3-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, I truly wonder what the future will look like now that we're almost 3 years post-incident. With all the social justice reform that occurred over the past 900 days, I saw very little that would make society safer. And even more concerning, I saw very little that would prevent another incident from occurring like the one that did occur on May 25th, 2020. In law enforcement world, there are retirements and promotions every day. Even more so recently because of the last few years, cops all over the country have either retired early or they've moved on to another career field. But at the end of the day, vacant positions must be filled. There is an expectation from the public that when they call, someone will come. And when the hiring pool becomes as shallow as it is right now, agencies will be forced to take what they can get. And what used to be the cream of the crop is gone. And these brand new cops with a very large question mark looming over their heads as they walk out onto the street is a really uncomfortable feeling. And rather than the confidence and the conviction that agencies used to hold, many of them feel as if they're just rolling the dice with this next generation. And I mentioned previously the concern of follow through after any critical incident that creates distrust between society and law enforcement, specifically George Floyd's death. But in the realm of preparation and prevention for future incidents, the only real tool we have is good cops outnumbering the bad in conjunction with criminals being held accountable for their actions. Now, there is no alternative, and we are seeing the results in real time right now. Violent criminal activity, to include homicides, they're at an all-time high, while staffing and overall retention among law enforcement agencies is an all-time low. That's a horrible combination. The social justice movement in 2020, they were so hell-bent on getting rid of cops entirely that they didn't consider the long-term ramifications of those actions. And before we can identify the solution, we have to first understand that there's more than one problem, and all of those problems do not fall entirely on the backs of law enforcement. If we truly want to see change must come from a collective. In the fight against evil, nothing of value will ever be achieved if we act alone. The main problem that we see is a lot of these kids that would normally be told, hey, thanks for your interest, but, no thank you. Don't call us, we'll call you. Those are now being offered positions. All right, you're in. Hit the road and do your best. It's not a very comfortable scenario for the other cops to watch and go, man, I hope that works out. Because what that justice movement managed to do was eliminate all of the great cops and then introduce the possibility of even more Derek Chauvins walking the streets. And I don't see a solution on the table right now. Unfortunately, I think things will have to get worse before it will get better. I think that most cities will have to turn into Gotham before the state leaders will make decisions that make society safer, or society, the majority of the people who voted for these assembly bills and these Senate bills and said, yeah, these are great ideas, they're going to have to see the repercussions. They will have to be victimized in order to understand the reality that is the thriving criminal element in the U.S. right now, specifically in some of the major cities. Guys, as always, I really appreciate you listening. I will be back hopefully next week with some better content. I know that I promised kind of a more funny, upbeat podcast, but I just had to say that and get it out there because we now need retention more than ever. We need good cops now more than ever. And if we don't do that soon, we're going to go full circle into, I don't even know, something horrible. But thank you. On Instagram at the Zen Cop, and I'm on Twitter, but I don't really tweet. And if you're listening to this, you're on YouTube, the Zen Cop podcast. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. I always remind people that I do this on my own time, my own dime. I'm trying to get good information out to keep this freight train from hell on the tracks, because that's all we can do. All right, guys, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you.